Declan Mercer had bet everything on a woman who turned out to be worth less than the dust on his boots. Or so he thought until the night she saved his daughter's life with nothing but a song and two trembling hands, the amber light of kerosene. Lamps flickered across weathered faces in Copper Creek's only saloon, where fortunes were made and lost with the turn of a card. Declan Mercer sat rigid in his chair, watching his life's work disappear into the elegant fingers of a woman who claimed to be Boston royalty. Miss Freya Winters had arrived 3 weeks ago on the eastbound stage, all silk gloves and promises of inheritance money that would transform his struggling ranch into the finest cattle operation this side of the Colorado River. Another 1,000, Mr. Mercer. Freya's voice carried the refined accent of old money, though something in her green eyes flickered like a dying flame. The papers from my father's estate should arrive any day now. Declan's jaw tightened. Every sensible bone in his body screamed warnings. But his 8-year-old daughter Tessa needed medicine, needed hope, needed more than what his drought-stricken land could provide. The other ranchers had already refused him loans. The bank had foreclosed on 2 neighboring spreads just last month. Freya Winters represented his last chance, if she truly was who she claimed to be. That makes 8,000 total, he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. I've got nothing left to stake, Miss Winters. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then perhaps we should discuss collateral of a different nature. The saloon fell silent except for the distant howl of prairie, wind through broken shutters. You could almost taste the tension, thick as molasses and twice as bitter. Declan's hand moved instinctively to the worn leather holster at his hip, then stopped. A man didn't draw on a lady, no matter how deep the quicksand beneath his feet. What kind of collateral? He asked. Your ranch. All of it. Freya's fingers drummed against the scarred oak table. If my inheritance doesn't arrive within the month, you sign over the deed. If it does. She paused, studying his face with the intensity of a hawk sizing up prey. If it does, I'll not only return your money, but double it, plus enough to expand. You're heard threefold. Declan thought of Tessa, fever-bright and fragile in her narrow bed above the mercantile. Doc Harmon had been clear. The girl needed proper medicine, not the prairie remedies that weren't touching whatever sickness had taken hold. Winter was coming fast, and his cattle were already thin from the drought. Without feed money, half the herd would be dead by spring. I need time to consider. There is no time. Freya's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something desperate and raw beneath the polished veneer. The opportunity I'm offering won't wait for a man's conscience to catch up with his circumstances. Through the saloon's grimy windows, Declan could see the distant outline of his ranch house, dark against the star-scattered sky. 3 generations of Mercers had worked that land, had bled and sweated to carve something lasting from the unforgiving prairie. His grandfather's hands had laid the foundation stones. His father had died defending it from raiders. Now Declan was about to gamble it all on the word of a woman whose story had more holes than a rustler's alibi. But Tessa's pale face haunted him, and the weight of single fatherhood pressed down like a stone on his chest. His wife had died bringing their daughter into this world, and he'd sworn on her grave that he'd give that child everything, even if it meant risking everything. All right, he said finally. 1 month. Freya's smile returned, brilliant and terrible. Excellent. We'll need witnesses, of course, and proper documentation. As if summoned by her words, 2 men emerged from the saloon's shadowy corners. Declan recognized them both. Jackson LeBlanc, a gambler whose luck ran as cold as creek water in January, and August Harmon, the town's only lawyer and the doctor's dissolute younger brother. Their presence here wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. Gentlemen, Freya nodded to them. If you would be so kind as to witness this agreement. The papers appeared as if by magic, crisp and official-looking in the lamplight. Declan read through them twice, his heart sinking with each carefully worded clause. The terms were ironclad. 30 days for Freya to produce documented proof of her inheritance, or the entire Mercer ranch would transfer to her name. There's something else, Freya said as he reached for the pen. A gesture of good faith, if you will. I'd like to meet your daughter. Declan's blood turned to ice. Tessa's got nothing to do with this. On the contrary, Freya's green eyes glittered, with an emotion he couldn't name. A woman about to become your business partner should meet all members of the family, don't you think? After all, if my inheritance comes through as expected, I'll be helping to secure that child's future. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows like skeleton fingers against glass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a sound that raised the hair on Declan's arms and whispered of things gone wrong in the dark. But as Declan's hand hovered over the contract, ready to sign away everything he'd ever loved, he had no idea that the real game was just beginning, and that the mysterious Miss Winters had secrets that would either save them all or destroy everything he held dear. The ink was still wet on the contract when Freya insisted on riding out to the ranch. That very night, Declan's protests fell on deaf ears. The woman had a will of iron wrapped in silk, and she'd made it clear that seeing Tessa wasn't a request. A sick child needs tending, she'd said simply, gathering her dark wool cloak. And I've some experience with fevered little ones. Now, as their horses picked their way across the moonlit prairie, Declan studied his unlikely business partner. She rode like someone born to the saddle, her posture straight and confident despite the treacherous terrain. Most Eastern ladies he'd known could barely manage a carriage ride without swooning. Yet Freya navigated the rocky gulches and hidden prairie dog holes like she'd been doing it all her life. "You ride mighty well for a Boston heiress," he said finally. "A woman learns many things when necessity demands it." Her voice carried across the wind, careful and measured. Perhaps more than you might expect. They crested the final hill, and Declan's ranch spread before them. A modest collection of buildings huddled against the vast emptiness like a child's toys scattered on a blanket. The house itself was solid timber and stone, built to weather the harsh winters and prairie storms. But in the moonlight, it looked smaller than he remembered, more vulnerable. Inside, old Wren Carver looked up from her knitting with relief. The weathered widow had been caring for Tessa since the fever took hold, and the strain showed in every line of her face. "Doc Harmon came by again," she whispered. "Says the child's taken a turn for the worse. Won't eat, won't drink. Just lies there burning up like a coal in winter." Declan's heart clenched. He started toward the narrow stairs, but Freya's hand on his arm stopped him. "Let me see her first," she said softly. "Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes can spot what others miss." There was something in her tone, gentle but utterly certain, that made him step aside. Freya climbed the stairs with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to sick rooms, her silk dress rustling like autumn leaves. Tessa lay in the small bed Declan had carved from pine 3 years ago, her dark hair damp with sweat, her breathing shallow and quick. The sight of his daughter, so small, so still, hit him like a physical blow. She was all he had left of his wife, all that mattered in a world that seemed determined to take everything good and grind it to dust. Freya knelt beside the bed, her hand hovering over Tessa's forehead without quite touching. "How long has she been like this?" "For days now." Declan's voice cracked. "Doc says it's the lung fever that's been going around. Lost 3 children over in Millerville last month." "MMM." Freya's eyes were distant, thoughtful. "And what remedies have you tried?" "Willow bark tea. Cold compresses. Doc brought some laudanum, but..." He trailed off, seeing the disapproval in Freya's expression. "Laudanum will only mask the symptoms, not cure the cause." She stood, moving to the window where moonlight caught the planes of her face. "This child needs warmth, not cold. Moisture, not drying powders. Her lungs are fighting for every breath." Before Declan could ask what she meant, Freya had rolled up her sleeves and begun issuing quiet instructions. Hot water, clean linens, and, most surprisingly, honey, if you have it. And mint leaves, fresh if possible. For the next hour, Declan watched in amazement as this supposed Boston heiress transformed his daughter's sickroom. She built a tent of blankets over the bed, then filled a basin with steaming water infused with mint and honey. The sweet, medicinal scent filled the air, and within minutes, Tessa's breathing seemed to ease. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked as Freya's hand stilled for just a moment. "I told you. A woman learns many things when necessity demands it." But there was something else in her voice now, something that spoke of long nights and desperate battles fought in rooms just like this one. Declan found himself wondering what necessity had taught Miss Freya Winters, and why a woman with a supposed fortune in Boston inheritance would know more about nursing than some doctors he'd met. "She's beautiful," Freya said softly, smoothing Tessa's damp hair. She has your eyes, but there's something else, something of her mother, I'd guess. How did you? Declan stopped. He'd never mentioned his late wife. A father's love has a particular quality, Freya said, not looking at him. And a motherless child carries a certain sadness, no matter how well loved. I recognize both. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Declan wanted to ask more, but Tessa stirred, her eyes fluttering open for the first time in days. Papa. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, sweetheart. He knelt beside the bed, taking her small hand in his. How do you feel? Better. Tessa's gaze found Freya, and a shy smile crossed her fever-flushed face. Are you an angel? Freya's laugh was soft and musical, but there was something broken in it. No, little one. Just a woman who's learned that sometimes the best medicine is simply caring enough to try. As if drawn by some invisible thread, Tessa reached out her free hand toward Freya. The gesture was so trusting, so innocent, that Declan saw something crack in Freya's carefully composed expression. Would you like me to sing to you? Freya asked, her voice catching slightly. Tessa nodded, and Freya began to hum, a low, haunting melody that seemed to come from someplace deep and sad. The tune was unfamiliar, but it wrapped around them like a warm blanket, filling the small room with unexpected peace. Watching them together, his daughter and this mysterious woman who'd appeared in his life like a comet, Declan felt something shift inside his chest. Whatever game Freya Winters was playing, whatever secrets she was hiding, there was genuine caring in the way she tended to Tessa. Real knowledge in her healing methods. Real pain in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. But as Tessa's breathing finally evened out and sleep took hold, Declan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something important. A crack in Freya's armor that revealed not the cold schemer he'd expected, but a woman with wounds as deep as his own. 3 days later, Tessa was sitting up in bed asking for pancakes, and Declan was beginning to think he'd misjudged Freya Winters entirely. She'd returned each evening to check on his daughter, bringing small gifts, a carved wooden horse, wild prairie flowers, stories of faraway places that made Tessa's eyes shine with wonder. But it was the fourth night that changed everything. Declan was checking the horses in the barn when he heard voices coming from the house. Low, urgent, and definitely not belonging to Wren Carver. He moved silently through the darkness, his hand instinctively finding the grip of his Colt. Through the kitchen window, he could see Freya seated at his rough-hewn table, but she wasn't alone. Jackson LeBlanc leaned against the doorframe, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. The telegram came today, he was saying. From Boston. There is no Winters estate, no inheritance, no wealthy father who died and left his daughter a fortune. Declan's blood turned to ice water. You can almost taste the betrayal in the air, bitter as burnt coffee and twice as black. I know, Freya said quietly. Her voice held none of the refined Boston accent she'd used in the saloon. Instead, it carried the rougher cadences of someone who'd learned to speak in places where weakness meant death. I've known all along. Then why in hell did you make that deal with Mercer? Jackson's voice rose, and Freya shushed him sharply, glancing toward the stairs where Tessa slept. Because I needed time. Freya's hands were steady as she poured coffee, but Declan could see the tension in her shoulders. Time to figure out another way. Another way to what? You've got nothing, Freya. Less than nothing. When that month is up, you'll own a ranch you can't afford to maintain and owe debts you can't pay. And that's assuming Mercer doesn't put a bullet in you when he finds out the truth. Freya's laugh was sharp and humorless. Declan Mercer is many things, but he's not a killer. Not of women, anyway. You don't know that. I know enough. Freya stood, moving to the window where moonlight caught the determination in her face. I've been watching him for weeks. He's a good man, Jackson. Better than most. The kind who'd give his last dollar to help a stranger, who'd work himself to death for his child. The kind who deserves better than what life's dealt him. Declan's grip tightened on his gun. Whatever game this woman was playing, it was deeper and more dangerous than simple fraud. So what's the plan? Jackson asked. Because Eden's getting impatient. And you know what happens when she gets impatient. At the mention of that name, Freya went rigid. Eden doesn't understand. This isn't just about the money anymore, isn't it? Jackson's voice turned cold. Because from where I'm standing, you're getting soft. That little girl upstairs, Her father. They're making you forget what you really are. And what am I, Jackson? Freya's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of pain. A thief? A con artist? A woman who preys on decent people because she doesn't know any other way to survive. You're a survivor, Jackson said firmly, just like the rest of us. And survivors don't let sentiment get in the way of staying alive. Freya was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the scarred wood of the table. I was 8 years old when my parents died in that fire, she said finally. 8. And suddenly I was alone on the streets of Chicago with nothing but the clothes on my back and a will to live that wouldn't let me die. Declan found himself leaning closer, despite the betrayal burning in his chest. This wasn't the polished story of Boston wealth she'd fed him. This was raw, real, and painful. Eden found me 6 months later, half dead from hunger and cold. She taught me to read people, to find their weaknesses, to become whatever they needed me to be. She saved my life, Jackson, but she also damned it. Freya's voice broke slightly. For 15 years, I've been exactly what she made me. But that little girl upstairs, she looks at me like I'm something good, like I'm worth saving. You can't save everyone, Freya. No, she agreed. But maybe I can save someone. Maybe I can be the person Tessa thinks I am, instead of the person I've always been. Jackson pushed away from the doorframe, his expression grim. Eden won't let you walk away. You know that. She's got too much invested in this job, and she's already made arrangements with the railroad men for what happens to this land once you own it. The railroad? Freya's voice sharpened. She said this was just about the money from the con. Wake up, Freya. This was never about conning one desperate rancher. This whole valley's sitting on a fortune in mineral rights, and the railroad wants it all. Your job was to acquire the Mercer Ranch, then sell it to them for 10 times what it's worth. In cattle land, the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The drought hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated. The other ranchers hadn't just happened to refuse Declan loans. They'd been warned off. This entire situation had been designed to make him desperate enough to gamble everything on the word of a beautiful stranger. How many other ranchers? Freya asked, her voice hollow. Does it matter? You've got your assignment. 2.5 weeks to make Mercer sign over the deed, then disappear before he figures out what really happened. Freya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I won't do it. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. She moved toward the door, but Jackson caught her arm. Eden's got men watching this place. Watching you. If you try to run, if you try to warn Mercer, well, let's just say that little girl upstairs would be an easy way to ensure your cooperation. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Freya's face went white, then hardened into something dangerous. If anyone touches Tessa, then do your job. Jackson's smile was cold as winter dawn. It's simple, really. Break Declan Mercer's heart, or Eden will break much more than that. After Jackson left, Freya sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, her head in her hands. From his hiding place, Declan watched her shoulders shake with silent sobs, and despite everything he'd just learned, his heart ached for her. But as the first light of dawn crept across the prairie, Declan realized that everything he thought he knew about Freya Winters was a lie, and that the real danger to his family was just beginning. The next morning brought Eden Bellamy herself, riding into the ranch yard like a force of nature dressed in midnight black. She was beautiful in the way a rattlesnake is beautiful, all sleek lines and deadly grace. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her pale blue eyes missed nothing. As they swept over Declan's modest holdings, Miss Winters, Eden called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. I believe we have business to discuss. Declan watched from the barn as Freya emerged from the house, her spine straight despite the obvious fear in her eyes. Tessa clung to her skirts, having grown attached to the woman who'd saved her life, and the sight of his daughter's trusting face made Declan's chest tight with protective fury. Eden. Freya's voice was carefully neutral. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. Eden's gaze flicked to Tessa, and something cold flickered in her expression. Such a pretty child. It would be a shame if anything happened to her. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Freya's hand moved protectively to Tessa's shoulder, and Declan saw her fingers tremble slightly. There's no need for that, Freya said quietly. I'm handling the situation. Are you? Eden dismounted with fluid grace, her boots clicking against the hard-packed earth. Because from what I hear, you've been playing nursemaid instead of completing your assignment. The Railroad Consortium is getting impatient, my dear. They've invested considerable resources in this operation. The month isn't up yet. No, but your resolve seems to be weakening. Eden's smile was sharp as a blade. Perhaps you need a reminder of what happens to those who disappoint me. She snapped her fingers, and two men emerged from the tree line, hard-faced. Gunfighters with the cold eyes of killers. Declan recognized the type, had fought alongside and against their kind during the war. These weren't ordinary ranch hands, or even common outlaws. These were professionals. You remember Marcus and Cole, Eden said pleasantly. They've been so eager to renew their acquaintance with you. Freya's face went pale, but she didn't back down. I said I'm handling it. Then handle it. Today. Eden's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Get Mercer to sign over the deed, or I'll take what I need from his corpse and make sure that little girl watches every moment of it. The words hit Declan like a physical blow. He'd heard enough death threats in his life to know when someone meant business, and Eden Bellamy meant every word. His hand moved to his gun, but the smart part of his brain warned him to wait, to learn more before acting. There's another way, Freya said desperately. The mineral rights. Surely there are other ranches, other ways to get what the railroad wants without. Without what? Without breaking your tender heart. Eden's laugh was like breaking glass. You were never meant to have a heart, my dear. I spent years training that weakness out of you, and now you're letting sentiment undo all my careful work. I'm not the same person I was when you found me. No, you're not. You're weaker. Eden began to circle Freya like a predator, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. That starving child I pulled from the Chicago gutters understood survival. She knew that in this world, you take what you need or you die. But this woman thinks she can afford conscience. From the house, Tessa's voice carried across the yard. Miss Freya? Are you coming back to read to me? The innocent question hung in the air like a prayer, and Declan saw something break in Freya's expression. I'll do it, she whispered. Just leave them alone. Please. That's my girl. Eden's smile was triumphant. You have until sunset. After that, Marcus and Cole will handle things their way. As Eden remounted her horse, she paused to look directly at the barn where Declan was hidden. Her knowing smile sent ice through his veins. Oh, and Freya, Eden called out, do give my regards to Mr. Mercer. I'm sure he's been finding our conversation most educational. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving Freya standing alone in the yard with his daughter still clinging to her dress. Declan emerged from the barn, his face a mask of controlled fury. Papa, Tessa ran to him, but her eyes kept darting back to Freya with confusion. The pretty lady looked scared. Are the bad people gone? Yes, sweetheart. They're gone. Declan's voice was steady, but his eyes never left Freya's face. Why don't you go inside and ask Mrs. Carver to make you some hot chocolate? Tessa hesitated, sensing the tension between the adults, but finally skipped toward the house. Only when she was safely inside did Declan speak again. How long have you known I was listening? Since the second night. Freya's voice was barely above a whisper. You move like a man who's spent time in dangerous places, Declan. Your footsteps are too quiet, your awareness too sharp. You're no simple rancher. Neither are you a simple con artist. He moved closer, his hand resting on his gun butt. That woman, Eden, she's more than just your boss. She's afraid of you, or she wouldn't need two gunfighters to keep you in line. Freya's laugh was bitter. Afraid? You don't know Eden Bellamy. She's never been afraid of anything in her life. Then why the elaborate threats? Why not just kill me and take the land? Because she needs it to look legal. The Railroad Consortium she works for can't afford to have their land acquisitions questioned by territorial authorities. They need deeds, not corpses. Freya's hands were shaking now, and she clasped them together to still them. But if you don't sign willingly, they'll make it look like an accident. Declan finished the thought grimly. Raiders, maybe. Or a fire. Something that leaves no questions and no survivors. I won't let that happen. The words burst from Freya with desperate intensity. I can't. That little girl. She's everything pure and good in this world. She deserves better than what I've brought into her life. Then help me stop this. Freya's eyes snapped to his, hope and fear warring in their depths. You trust me? After everything you've heard, I trust that you love my daughter, Declan said simply. And sometimes that's enough. The late afternoon sun was already casting long shadows across the prairie. Sunset was still hours away, but Declan could feel time slipping through his fingers like sand. Eden's men would be watching, waiting for any sign of betrayal. There's something else, Freya said quietly. Something I didn't tell Eden. The real reason the railroad wants this land so badly. The mineral rights. More than that. Freya reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this in Jackson's room. It's a geological survey. There's silver under this valley, Declan. Enough to make everyone in the territory rich. Declan stared at the paper, his mind racing. Silver would explain everything. The drought, the coordinated pressure on local ranchers, the railroad's interest. It would also explain why Eden was willing to kill to get it. How do we fight them, he asked. We don't fight them. Freya's voice was steady now, filled with grim determination. We beat them at their own game. But as the sun sank lower toward the horizon and the shadows grew longer, Declan realized that beating Eden Bellamy would require more than clever plans. It would require a sacrifice that might cost them everything they'd found in each other. The sun hung low on the horizon like a dying ember when Freya made her choice. She walked into the saloon alone, her chin high and her green dress pristine despite the chaos of the day. Eden sat at the same table where it had all begun, flanked by Marcus and Cole, her pale eyes glittering with anticipated victory. Right. On time, Eden purred. I do so appreciate punctuality. Do you have the deed? I have something better. Freya's voice carried across the now empty saloon with crystalline clarity. I have the truth. Eden's smile faltered slightly. The truth is a luxury neither of us can afford, my dear. The truth is that you made one crucial mistake. Freya reached into her reticule, but instead of papers, she withdrew a small silver locket. You taught me to read people, Eden, to find their weaknesses, but you never taught me to recognize my own strength. She opened the locket, revealing a tiny daguerreotype of a woman who looked remarkably like Freya herself. This belonged to my mother. The mother you told me was dead. The mother who actually died looking for me after you stole me from that orphanage. Eden's face went white. That's impossible. The fire. There was no fire. Freya's voice was steady, now, filled with the quiet strength of someone who'd finally found her truth. There was just a frightened little girl you needed for your schemes, and a grieving mother who spent her last years searching for a daughter who'd vanished into the criminal underworld. The saloon doors swung open, and August Harmon entered, with a folder thick with legal documents. Behind him came Doc Harmon, Ren Carver, and half a dozen other townspeople, all carrying papers, all wearing expressions of grim determination. What is this? Eden hissed. Justice, Declan said as he stepped through the doors, Tessa's small hand clasped firmly in his. See, while you were busy threatening my family, the good people of Copper Creek were busy doing some research of their own. August cleared his throat and began to read. By order of the territorial governor, Eden Bellamy, also known as Elena Blackwood, is wanted for fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy in the deaths of 7 ranchers across Colorado and Wyoming territories. You have no proof, Eden snapped, but her composure was cracking. We have something better, Doc Harmon said quietly. We have witnesses, including a young woman brave enough to testify about 15 years of forced criminal activity. Freya's hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. I'll testify to everything, Eden. Every con, every theft, every life you've destroyed. But first, I have something that belongs to you. She placed the signed deed on the table, not the deed to Declan's ranch, but something else entirely. Eden's eyes widened as she recognized her own handwriting. This is your confession, Freya said simply. The one you wrote 3 years ago when you thought you were dying of that fever. You wanted to make peace with your conscience before you met your maker. You even signed it, in front of witnesses. I destroyed that document. You destroyed a copy. I kept the original. Freya's smile was sharp as winter starlight. You taught me well, Eden. Always have insurance. Eden's hand moved toward her gun, but Marcus and Cole were already stepping away from her. Professional. Killers they might be, but they were also survivors, and they could read the writing on the wall. This isn't over, Eden snarled. Yes, it is. Tessa's clear voice cut through the tension like a bell. She stepped forward, her small hand still clasped in her father's, and looked up at Eden with the fearless honesty of childhood. You hurt people. That makes you a bad person. But Miss Freya helped make me better when I was sick. That makes her good. The simple truth of it hung in the air like a benediction. Eden's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like what she truly was. A broken woman who'd spent so long living in darkness that she'd forgotten what light looked like. Take her, August said quietly, and two territorial marshals who'd been waiting outside stepped forward with shackles. As Eden was led away, she paused beside Freya. You think you've won something, she whispered, but you'll never escape what I made you. The streets of Chicago are in your blood, girl. You'll always be what you were. No, Freya said softly. I'll always be what I choose to be. And I choose to be someone worthy of the people who love me. The saloon emptied slowly, townspeople drifting back to their lives with the satisfied air of justice served. Soon, only Declan, Tessa, and Freya remained, standing in the amber light of the kerosene lamps. So what happens now? Declan asked. Now I keep my promise. Freya reached into her satchel and withdrew a thick envelope. Your money, all of it, plus interest. But the inheritance was never real. But this is. She smiled, and it transformed her face completely. Turns out there's a bounty on Eden Bellamy's head. $5,000, dead or alive. I prefer alive. Declan stared at the money, then at the woman who'd turned his world upside down and somehow made it right again. And the silver deposits belong to the people of this valley. I've already filed the paperwork with the territorial office. Every rancher who's been forced off their land will get their fair share. Freya's voice grew soft. It's not much, but it's a start. A chance to build something good from all the bad. What about you? Tessa asked, tugging on Freya's skirt. Are you going to stay and help us build? Freya knelt down to Tessa's level, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Would you like me to stay? Yes. Papa needs someone to help him not burn the biscuits, and I need someone to sing me to sleep. Over his daughter's head, Declan met Freya's eyes. In them, he saw not the polished con artist or the broken victim, but simply a woman who'd found her way home through love and choice and the simple act of caring for others. Stay, he said quietly. Please. I'm not the woman you thought I was. Freya whispered. No. Declan agreed, stepping closer. You're better. You're real. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Freya Winters, whose real name was Sarah McKenna, daughter of Irish immigrants and survivor of more than any person should bear, finally let herself believe in the possibility of home. Outside, the prairie wind carried the scent of approaching rain, and somewhere in the distance, the first spring flowers were beginning to bloom in the endless grass, turning the barren landscape into something beautiful and new. The three of them walked home together through the star-scattered darkness. No longer strangers bound by deception, but a family bound by choice, forgiveness, and the simple truth that sometimes the most valuable thing a person can offer isn't money or land, or even their past. It's their future, freely given to those who matter most. Well, partner, if this tale of love, deception, and redemption on the frontier warmed your heart like a campfire on a cold night, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and ring that bell for more stories from the wild, Wild West. And tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from today? Are you out there under the big sky, or dreaming of prairie winds from someplace far away?